Welcome to How We Get Through, the podcast where we share stories, mental health insights, and healing advice on life's everyday challenges. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder of the How We Get Through app. We are back today with part 2 with our special guest, Dr. Pauline Peck. In this episode, Pauline discusses the contrast between individualistic and collectivistic cultures and the unique challenges faced by children of immigrants in balancing cultural identity and boundary setting. Pauline shares some really great insights on how to find that sweet spot between these different cultural styles and how to make the most of the choices we have. Can't wait for you to hear it. Hello and welcome back. We are with Pauline Peck for part 2. She is a licensed psychologist in Santa Barbara, right?
Yep.
Yes, that's in California, if people aren't in California. Okay, so we are back for part 2. We got really deep into the first episode about cultural implications in therapy, westernized shit that happens and messes everything up, your journey into creating healing spaces for daughters of immigrants. And this episode, I really would like to kind of dive deep into boundaries. And I think the first question is like, why don't boundaries exist in, or why is it only in Western cultures, or where is this coming from, and where's the intersect, I think, with both of them?
Yeah. I think boundaries are such a buzzword now.
Yes.
And clearly I've created a course around this, so I am part of the buzzing. But I will say that it's interesting to think about this desire for boundaries and boundary setting as so important. That is mired in more of a Western approach, in a more individualistic approach. When I exist here and you exist separate from me, and the self is the most important thing. The self is prioritized above any other. So in that kind of messaging, boundary setting is letting you know, I've got to protect the self at all costs. There's a hyper individualism. Self-reliance is really important. Being independent is really important. And so then it becomes really demarcating. That's you, this is me, and I've got to take care of me. You see it sometimes in like, you've got to protect your peace. Again, these are not all wrong and bad. These are just mired in that cultural framework. When you look at collectivistic cultures, the self is actually defined in between us. I am because you are. We are. I exist in a relationship with you, and the collective is actually prioritized. The connection is actually prioritized. Maybe even the role and the duties are prioritized. So there's less of a, I exist here and you exist there, and to be mentally well, to be physically well, to protect our peace, we have to be separated and demarcated like so. It becomes, we're in this kind of dance together where we kind of take care of one another and we reflexively know when to give and when to not. And there's a lot more, not that there are no boundaries, but that there are more unspoken norms that dictate the flow and exchange of what's happening between us. There is the, I do this when you're over here, and then I know you're going to reciprocate when I'm at your house. And so there's less of a mine and yours. It's like right now I'm the one that's giving, and I know that I can actually rely on that to come back to me if we both operate according to some of these cultural expectations and norms, the contracts that subtly we have said yes to. And so I think that boundaries exist, they just look different because the need to demarcate self as separate from another self is just not as important. The collective is important, which means that the individual people might give and take at different rates to prioritize the collective. So it's just a different framework. So it's like, you have to protect your peace and you've got to carve out those boundaries. Doesn't really speak to, it does speak to the need that we all need to know what works for us and what doesn't. And we all have individual needs regardless of what your culture is, right? You've got to make, physically, you have your own body and you have your own needs. You don't live in another person's body. I mean, some of these are universal. But the meaning of boundaries, the urgency around boundaries and what boundary setting even looks like, which is not necessarily the particular, like focus of the course, but the background is the buzzword of boundary setting and the way that it looks is really mired in a more individualistic culture, which I actually think then becomes really hard, because if you're a child of immigrant, absorbing all of that, it doesn't really work for your family and it doesn't really work for your life. And there's like parts of it that you're like, but I like that thing that my parent does that they're telling me is like such a boundary crossing and is not healthy for adult parents to do for their adult children. And, then you're really confused. And so I thought, I've really got to create a course that then helps people that are these multicultural beings, at least bicultural, if not multicultural, because I work with people who, are from a number of different ethnic and racial backgrounds, not just one. Then it's like, okay, this is a buzzword and this is important, and we all do need some things just for ourselves. Then how can I give children of immigrants particular tools that will work within this and not be more of what they're getting from more hyper individual, you shouldn't take care of your parents, you're an adult at 18, you leave, and then you're not taking care of your mom. That's what nursing homes are for. Like, how can I help bridge the divide? Because we do need some discussions around boundaries. And most people that are growing up here, they're bicultural beings that do want some of this around their mental health, because some of their mental health was developed in the Western world.
Right. Yeah. So there's two things as you were talking that I was thinking about. This idea of boundaries in the Western culture, I feel like, at least in my viewing of it, it's very spoken. It's very like, don't do this. Can you not do that? Yes. Very spoken, verbal, to the point. And what you're saying, culturally, the boundaries are unspoken. And so already, if we're like coming from this westernized view of like, well, just tell your parents, which I'm just laughing about, right? Just tell your parents like it's not going to happen, right? Or just, and that's even hard for someone who is is like quote unquote American or westernized, right? But differently, culturally, that just feels like such a 180, 360 maybe, that it's just a big gap. So to get from, if your therapist is telling you you're here and you have to go 60,000 miles that way, it feels difficult. It doesn't feel right. And it feels that then you can internalize that something is wrong with you. Why is it so difficult for you?
Yeah. And this whole thing around protect your peace, sometimes people are freaked out more and more anxious about setting the boundary that doesn't feel right, using the tool that is so culturally out of the norm, than what the boundary setting would give to them. So it becomes like, oh my gosh, the solution that you're offering me creates more of a problem than the problem itself. It's like, this is not useful. Just thinking about boundary setting with my family hurts me more than sitting through that one dinner a week for Shabbat that I don't want to have anyway. So it kind of leaves people, it's like, if not this, then nothing. And I want to say, no, it doesn't have to be that. There's a lot of other things in the middle. And I hope that people take that away from my course. Is this is a snippet. These are just some tools, but I keep coming back to, it's a mixed bag. It's a continuum. Like, there are a lot of different things you could utilize. These are just some that have worked with my clients, some that I put together in a short, tiny little under 40-minute course. I hope that it just gives you a sense of, it starts to open your mind. Like, oh, there's a million other unspoken, nonverbal things that I could do, subtle things that I could do, right? That's what I really wanted to bridge the gap. It's not spoken, direct, firm, or nothing. We've got so many choices in the continuum. Let's utilize them. Let's do some of the trial and error. Let's see what'll work for your family. You've got options here.
Yeah. And what I think you're speaking to, again, like, my mom is first generation, so I'm thinking about her a lot, but it almost feels like what you're saying is, I'm going to free you from the stuckness. Mm-hmm. Because I think it just feels, again, that stuck place of like, well, I can't go there and I can't go there, so I'm just going to stay here, which then causes mental health issues, which then causes more anxiety, which then causes like, I think maybe I can't do anything for myself. I have to do all for my family. And so again, it's like this, how do we hold both? And kind of, if we paint the picture that you're in the middle and you are feeling stuck, where can freedom really be for you in your unique experience?
Yeah. And it doesn't hit people against their cultures, because if you don't choose some of your culture, then it's almost like the children of immigrants feel like it's either I have to do it all like my family did, or I'm betraying them, as if there are only two ways of being, either or, where it's both. There are things about your family you're going to want to embrace and you're going to want to love on, which include, for some other people, boundary crossings. And that might be something you say, F that. This works for me. This is good. And there are other areas where you say, my family didn't teach me to do this. There's some pushback here, but I know I need to do this. That's the beauty of being a bicultural being. There's clash, there's confusion, there's difficulties, but it's not an either or. What if you could take from both, and then you could have these accessible to you at various choice points and use a variety of tools at your disposal to best fit the situation at hand? Openness, spaciousness, freedom, options, choices, empowerment. That is all what this work is. And it requires us to be cognitively flexible and not to look at either my family's way or the white Western way. Either they win or I win. It's like even that dichotomy is very much mired in individualism, right and wrong, black and white. Like there's so much middle, there's so much gray, and a lot of cultures honor that. Let's do that here.
Do you feel like that's the pull of just being an immigrant in the US, of like holding so tight to your culture and then also trying to assimilate? Like I'm that feels like that black and white, that push pull where you're like, my mom's Hungarian, and so it was like, we're proud Hungarians, and everyone's like, what's a Hungarian? Like we're like, we're Hungarian, and it's like we have like Hungarian sausage and the flag and whatever, and Hungary has the best food. Like there was just a proudness that we got as kids. But also I wasn't that first generation, which I think just hits so much harder. And you can speak to that too, where I didn't have to carry my parents' culture in that. I ended up being like a receiving from that. Oh, it makes me teary. Like I got to have the gift of it versus the, I'm feeling really sad for my mom. That push and pull of,
grief of it. It's the grief. And trying to live with the grief of it. You know, I think everybody's journey is different, but leaving for possibility, leaving for hope, maybe leaving for safety, leaving really horrible circumstances. It's so many things. You know, you're excited and happy to be out. There's a world of possibility. And there's fear, and you don't know the place, and you want to preserve your culture, and you also don't want to teach your children the language because you want them to not be looked upon. You know, like there's so much of all of that. It's every single thing you're saying and more. It's like and it's not a singular experience, but it's holding so many different things. The kind of the foundational piece of being an immigrant is both there and here and nowhere. It's like it's that just. There's so much around that of wanting to hold on to some pieces. And you'll see in the different generations, first gen, 1.5, second gen, 1.5 is if you came as a child, which I came from Iran at 4. Second gen is born here, like my sister was. My mom was pregnant at the time they moved. So that really changes. Assimilation changes when, depending on what you look like, right? Somebody who, you know, typically looks Chinese, they can be here they could be third gen, and they're still going to get the question, where are you from? Whereas most people don't ask me that based on my phenotype. So I think that assimilation, also the ethnic myth is a really good book, how the Poles and the Jews and the Irish and Italians or something like that became white, talks about the immigrants from back in the day, and the more white they were, the more quickly they got to assimilate and move into the nicer neighborhoods, and then not, you know, could just be proud of what it was that they offered, but didn't have the phenotypic barriers that are going to be there, like Asians, like Black people who were brought here and enslaved here. Regardless of how many generations they were here, they're always going to be othered because of the physical piece. So the assimilation and colorism and what you look like and racism and all of that gets mired into, you know, what your experience is like. But going back to this piece of holding on to something, it is both wanting to let go to get the goodies, because people come here to get the goodies, the safety, the educational advancements, the possibilities, the financial piece, the helping family back home, but as well as, oh my gosh, what a major loss, because you're starting over in a place that is so foreign, and you're also exposing your children, which is where the clash comes, You're exposing your children to so many things you're not prepared for. And children are then living open to another culture because they didn't choose to come here, and getting from them. And then it creates a clash with parents who are wanting to hold on to the cultures from the past. And then they don't have the tools to navigate that other than cut your parents off. Oh, that's really toxic. Your parent wants to control you. It's like, well, what about all the other things that you don't ever hear talked about when it comes to families and love that I want to hold on to? So then there's grief in how to deal with your parents, because either you have to completely disown them or disown your culture and do it the white way to protect your peace, or you just have to do it and it doesn't work for you because as a bicultural being, maybe you do want to have a few more communication pieces, or you do want to not talk about that, or you don't want them intruding on certain things. So it's like, wait a second, where are the tools to do the in-between thing? And I think we're such a unique culture. I'm a geriatric millennial, so I'm 39, born at 84. Okay?
Me too, girl. Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm. So there's this piece of, we are this unique culture because me having children, my children won't feel that. So it's like a zeitgeist. This is a period of time where the middle, the immigrants, or when you came as a young kid, and then you and your kids won't have those same struggles, but there's such a dearth, such a lack of the tools for doing this in between, for doing this kind of multicultural dance, not having to choose, not feeling like you're doing anything wrong, and feeling like you are totally enough, and your experience is one that is shared by many other people. That's what I was hoping that the course got you to, not just boundary setting in terms of, oh, you're doing it wrong, here's how to do it in this one way, but this is why it's so hard. Like you also mentioned, we don't talk directly. There are hierarchies and patriarchies that exist. There are certain cultural norms that talking about anything sensitive or emotional in nature is taboo. We've got all these things that we're working against. So, one of my tips, you'd ask me, like, what are some top tips for people? Is like, one of them is use your culture for you. Like, if there are certain unspoken things that you can rely on, these certain kind of things that you can't quite translate to English, you'll know what I mean. Some of those things you can use them for you rather than against you. You are part of your culture. And when you say, in order to boundary set, I have to disown my culture, it's like you're taking yourself outside of it. So then you disown a part of you. Then you're not holistically you. Me having kids, oh my God, did I realize I need to embrace my culture. I want to be more me, culturally speaking. And so a major thing that I hope people take away from this is use your culture for you, because you are your culture. You grew up eating the Hungarian sausage and doing whatever. So food, figuring out how to over food, lighthearted, using that connection to then say, hey, when you do this, using that joking, over some shared activity that you're doing. Now you're using your culture, because people do talk about difficult things using the little, things can have multiple meanings. And so you can use wordplay. That's very cultural speaking, right? I love this video. It's like a video from back in the day of in Farsi, the woman saying like all these different, the same word, baby, different and it means different things. Like baby, 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 like that's look. Or like baby, like come on now. You can just use the same word, look, in all these different ways. And the nuance that so many cultures have can be used in a way to set boundaries that say, baby, when they ask you about dating for the second time, third time, fifth time, then you say to your uncle, baby. And it's just this lighthearted way of being like, I'm not answering that question, right? Or using something that you would in a sing-songy way. Like Farsi is very playful and sing-songy and passionate and kind of dramatic and fun. It's like you can use that for yourself rather than it being this block. Oh, my culture is a obstacle in me setting boundaries. Sure, it gives you some unique challenges, and you can use it for you and not be fighting against it. You can be in the culture, and in the culture, you can figure out, okay, how do I carve out what is important for me to have so that I'm not going home like totally flooded all the time, or avoiding my family, which so many children of immigrants do. Oh, I just need to have distance. Well, physical distance and psychological distance, there's two separate things, but you can actually use your culture for you.
Yeah. I love it too. As you're thinking, I mean, it's just a generational picture, right? And so even thinking like our parents had boundaries at some point too. Like we're not just making them up. We're not the first ones to just, it might be from this Western point of view that doesn't make sense, but they've also had to learn how to be culturally with their family and also honor themselves or leave their country or do other things. Like they had to do and make hard choices as well. And so I think that's just really important that it's not just something that is like really brand new to your family in a sense, right? Like
people have said no for the entirety of human civilization. Your parents, many of them were boundary setters and cycle breakers just by being immigrants. That's already pretty revolutionary than just staying where you were. So someone has said no, someone has done something in your family, someone has done something that someone else didn't like, someone has endured that, and the consequences may have been grave, but this is not, I think that's beautiful. This is not a new concept. It's a buzzword. It's exciting. And I'm getting in on that buzzword and creating a course, but I hope I'm saying, hey, like you said, this is not brand new. And your culture already has tools embedded in it where you can say no with cultural sophistication and with cultural currency and cultural, it's a cultural, cultural currency is basically what I'm trying to say. It's like there are tools at your disposal that have always been there, and your parents. And if you start noticing that, you'll see how people say no. There's a lot of we'll see. There's a lot of inshallah. When are you going to have a kid? Inshallah. God willing. People will say that all the time when they really mean no, or I'm not talking about this, or I don't want to, or all of these ways. These exist in other cultures, and it's almost about reclaiming some of those tools again and reminding people that they have them, because all they get are these messages that are outside of their culture, and that would be a cultural violation for them. And which means, again, they'd have to disown part of themselves in order to utilize that, or when they utilize it, it's going to feel clunky and not second nature.
Yeah. Ooh, that's so good. Okay, one last question on this.
Yeah.
Is there a boundary that absolutely needs to be set that, in your opinion, that it feels very black and white?
Yeah, I would say, when we talk about boundaries, usually I'm talking, most of my clients, I will say too, talking well-intentioned parents who care a lot, who are loving and who do their best, and yet don't have a ton of information about mental health, have their own stuff they haven't fully resolved. They might be neglectful emotionally speaking, and they don't know it because they didn't have the emotional framework to even know what emotional attunement is, let alone emotional neglect. So they might have been heavy on taking care of you physically, but not attending to you emotionally, or shutting down some of the emotional things. Those are, I think, like a majority of the families I'm talking about. In the areas where boundary setting absolutely needs to be set, or you are being physically, psychologically, sexually abused, you are being physically hit, boundary setting. That's a hard no. You're around your family and they are berating you. They are cussing you out. They are being down on your identity. They are just putting you down. You would be embarrassed if someone were listening in on that, or you'd be afraid if a cop was standing next to you and your family was acting that way, because that could be like a verbal assault. Okay? No, somebody's invading you sexually. You're married. Doesn't matter. And your culture says woman succumbs to man all the time. No. Those are areas where no. And you will see so many cultural stories of people who have left situations when that has been present. Even where divorce didn't exist culturally, even when women weren't supposed to do X, Y, and Z, even when you have to keep the family intact, you will see so many cultural things where people have escaped situations like that, even within the culture. They've gotten shame and judgment, but there's a hard line when you are being physically hurt. And I think there's a difference between, my dad asks, how am I? He may not have the tools. I'm just speaking any dad, not necessarily my dad. He doesn't have the exact tools to kind of hold space for my disappointment. When I, complain about something, he might say, this won't last forever. And, that might feel a little dismissive to me. That's different than the kind of psychological abuse I'm talking about, where no apologies. I'm right no matter what. I am continuously, forcing upon you. And that has to be waded through within yourself, with someone else, maybe someone outside the system, to kind of really get a sense for it, because so many of these things are really steeped in cultural norms that sometimes it can be hard to see where that hard line is. So this is where I think we need support from a culturally sensitive and informed practitioner or person outside of ourselves. But I would say when it comes to active abuse, this isn't you're going to trial and error. If you are being physically hurt, financially exploited, sexually, you're being violated in some way, it's a hard no, regardless of how much cultural messages kind of add to that abuse.
Thanks for that. I think that was important to kind of state as we're talking about like the nuances and when there is a hard no and a hard boundary on that, because that's really important to mention that in any case, none of that is okay.
No.
At all. Yeah.
Never. It's like a universal. Right?
Yes.
There has to be some element of safety, and not just safety in the way that we say it, like psychologically, like can someone hold space? I mean, these are very Western things.
Right.
Someone may not be able to hold space, but they'll cut fruit for you and watch a TV show with you, and that can be love. And that's fine. But I mean, active harm to you,
listen,
that's never okay.
No. Yeah. Beautiful. Pauline, thank you so much. I loved having you on. You're doing so many things. So can you kind of mention, I don't know, the 10 billion things that you're doing right now? Where can people find you?
Absolutely. So I actually did a major rebrand and have a new website. Tori Sprinkle, my design queen, put together a really, really beautiful website that I think embodies and represents the kind of even the cultural symbolism. And you'll feel the daughters of immigrants and intercultural couples niche just scream at you when you go onto the website. And that's Noor, which Noor means light in Farsi. It means pomegranate in Armenian. There's a lot of personal and kind of symbolic cultural messages and meanings to that. So check that out. That's noortherapyandwellness.com. And on there, you'll see a resource page. You can get the course directly from there. You can get my free translation guide. That's a way to also opt into my newsletter that I send out on a bi-weekly, monthly, when I have time basis, but it's often, that is all things kind of children and children of immigrants and mental health. And so that's my freebie out there. If you'd like to work with me, there's a number of different ways. Within my practice, there's me and two associates that are master's level clinicians underneath me. And we each have our own little specialty area. So we can, help you with one-on-one therapy, as well as 3 different groups I've got. There's a Daughter of Immigrants group that Marjan, one of my, my associate, is running for the Daughters of Immigrants, California residents. Talia is running a local group for LGBTQ+, Psychodrama group. And then I'm running, I know, so fun, BIPOC clinician support group. So if you are a clinician listening to that and you want to be with other clinicians doing this work and how hard it is to be navigating, trying to get our own education, shed the old education, and then help others, I've got you. So those are the 3 groups that are running. And then if you don't want therapy, you want just more of a coaching, educational style thing, I do have a one-on-one program called the Culture and Connection Transformation Program. That's really like a 1-month deep dive where you and I are, I'm taking you through a lot of the psychological exercises that people do maybe in therapy over a length of time. It's this compact homework and working through it, kind of workbook style thing. And it's a 1-to-1 program that you can, the link is in my bio and my IG. You can find me on Instagram like almost every day. I post about this stuff all the time. Pauline the Psychologist is my handle. And from there, you can, chat with me about which of these options, whether it's individual therapy, group therapy, whether you just get the freebie and take that for a while, whether you get my newsletter and just start getting this information that feels tailored to you, culturally speaking, or as a clinician who wants to use this in their practice. And then from there, we can see where we go in terms of what you'd like to do. On an exciting thing I haven't even actually announced is I'm working with a woman in Australia who also works with daughters of immigrants and women of color. It's like the only other person I've seen doing this niche. Her name is Nancy Diaz. And she and I are putting together a workshop that we're hoping to launch in July, free workshop that is coming up in July. And it'll be like an interactive workshop with people, virtual, and a potential kind of group offering that's going to launch from there. But we're hoping to do that since July is BIPOC Mental Health Month. And so that's a collaboration that I'm working behind the scenes to prepare.
Yay. Yay. That's so exciting. As I mentioned, so many great things you're doing. So loving having you on the podcast, but also on the app. You're amazing. Ray really loved working with you. I mean, you just showed up and
I feel like
he really...
I feel like we need to have a double date, me, you, Ray, and my husband, because I feel like we are such kindred spirits. I had a great day with Ray. I feel like I've known you for a million years, and I'm just so thankful that this process brought us together. You are such a shining light and such just a walking heart. So I just love connecting with you, and just being on here today felt like just two girlfriends chatting.
I love it. Yes. Thank you so much.
And
okay, girl. Well, we'll see you later. And thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for listening to our show. We hope we gave you some insight on how you can start to navigate boundaries with your immigrant family. If you listen to this episode and you're like, this is me, then check out Pauline's course, Boundary Setting with Immigrant Parents, on the How We Get Through app, which is available for both Android and iPhone. Check out next week's episode as we talk about making a big decision with your partner with licensed couples therapist Abby Nordquist. You won't want to miss it.